Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Foresight TV, powered by ProCare HR. I first met Juanmari and then Freddie at a couple of NIC conferences. We're going to have a great conversation about senior living in Mexico and the opportunities that are just sitting there that you should be drooling over. Before we get started, I just want to say thanks for watching today. We are all about making the lives of people who live and work in senior living better, looking at new ideas, better ways to do senior living. And so before we get started, this. Hey guys, Steve Moran here. So, Freddie, Juanmari, before we get started with sort of what you guys do, why don't you just do a brief introduction of who you are and where home is, and then we'll get into what you're doing.
For sure. Thanks for the invite, Steve. Always a pleasure to speak with you. My name is Juanmari Molina. I'm based in Mexico City. And along with my partner, Freddie, we're developing an investment platform to acquire, develop, and do conversions for senior living assets in Mexico.
Great. Freddie?
Yes. Okay. My name is Freddie. We started this project with Juanmari a couple of years ago. As a matter of fact, we're raising a fund for the Riviera Maya, for the Yucatan Peninsula, as a matter of fact, in real estate. And we slowly started to assess the opportunity of senior living because we just discovered how underdeveloped, and especially with a personal experience that Juanmari had with his dad, and he was living in Miami and looking for a place in Miami to put his dad, and then looked into Mexico, and then we realized and learned more about the opportunity. We've been into this year and a half right now, and we're very excited. We're very excited about the opportunity that Mexico poses for senior living development.
So I'm really, as you know, we've talked, I'm super fascinated by senior living in Mexico. Mexico has clearly become one of those significant go-to places for vacation for people in the U.S. And I know there are a few senior living communities that have been built in Mexico. Some for people who are living native Mexicans, and of course I know around Lake Chapala there are some small communities that have some Americans, some expats coming from the U.S. Talk to me a little bit about what you're building and what your big dream is.
Sure, Steve. So we're targeting both the Mexican domestic market, which is composed of 4.5 million older adults, along with potentially a 20 million 75 plus market from the US, right? So when we're looking at the domestic metros, we're looking at Mexico City, Guadalajara, Monterrey, Querétaro, Puebla, Mérida, and we're looking at expat hubs such as Tijuana, Cancun, Puerto Vallarta, Ajijic that you mentioned, and many others, right? We're basically betting that, in Mexico, today as it stands, senior living is not a developed market. Culturally speaking, a lot of families look at senior living as a last resort. And, there's a negative connotation around senior living. Families tend to think that you're abandoning your loved one if you put him in a senior living. And so we're basically betting that the mindsets of Mexican families will change over the coming years as families are much smaller than they were, decades ago. And also the older adult is living longer lives, right? So that's for the Mexican demand. And when we're looking at the expat demand, as you may know and you know better than us, the cost for senior living in the US is very high, and it keeps on going up. And I think there's many seniors that are either, kicking off their entry into a senior living a few years, or they're basically living at home and not looking at senior living. So we're trying to capture some of that demand, and we want to offer American expats the ability to have the same service, if not better, at a fraction of the cost in Mexico, right? So this is basically what we're trying to do. Again, just so you have some context, there's less than 2,000 beds of senior living in Mexico, institutional class, compared to 2 million in the US, right? So we see there's a huge market for development, and we want to be a part of this story.
So I think the big challenge, of course, is to there's some perceptions, right? So the first is there have been some really high profile stories of crime in Mexico, and you think, well, older people are more vulnerable, and so there's going to be some fear about that. Can you talk about that sort of that fear, and how do you respond to that?
It's in Mexico right now. You have world-class healthcare facilities. Specifically in the big metropolitan areas. That's are the locations that we're targeting. In terms of other concern that people has about Mexico, it's all the bad press that Mexico gets in terms of safety. But if you look at it, and if you look at the real numbers and the hard data, you can see that there are, many cities in Mexico, like for instance, Merida. Merida ranks second safest city in the whole of the Americas, right after Quebec, for instance, right? And that puts it, and you have Puerto Vallarta, and you have Querétaro, that's ranking amongst the 20th safest, and on top of many Canadian cities like Vancouver or even Houston, or a lot of cities in the U.S. as well. So it depends where you are in Mexico. Mexico City is I don't know if you're familiar with it, but I'm sure many in your audience is. It feels really a really safe city. You can walk at night, and there's no big crime issues over there. You have to go to up north, close to the border, and those places that we all know about it and we heard in the news. So we think Mexico is going to become eventually a new frontier for the senior living industry, even for the maybe starting with the long forgotten middle market of the U.S. itself, but basically the domestic customer. There's only in Mexico right now, just to give you an idea, you only have 2,000 units beds of institutional side. That's about 15 facilities overall in the whole country. So it's way underdeveloped. And people is definitely looking for this alternative, even though there is a challenge and there is a cultural barrier about it. People are starting to understand, and moreover, when it becomes a necessity for the families, because today the family support structure, it's much less than it was 20, 30 years ago.
So one of the things that occurs to me, as you guys know, recently ProCare HR acquired Foresight. And so we're rethinking our whole approach to content to be able to go deeper and wider in terms of what we're doing. And so part of that process is that I'm doing a bunch of one-on-one calls with senior living executives and just asking them about what's important and what they're talking about. And I had a long conversation with somebody this morning, well known. I don't have permission to tell you who it was, but we spent a lot of time talking about the affordability issue and the lack of middle market, and it's a very, very significant problem, as you well know. So maybe we ought to set the framework a little bit. So what would senior living cost if somebody were to move to Mexico and move into a nice, I don't know, an Aegis type building or a Watermark or something like that?
Definitely. So I'll give you, apples to apples comparison, without naming the operator, but there's, one of the most relevant operators in the US that has a property in Mexico City. And when I had the situation with my dad, we're looking for senior living for him in Miami. This same property, the monthly rent all-in cost was plus minus $15,000 per month. My dad has dementia, and so this was memory care facility. And the same operator, the facility they have in Mexico City, in Santa Fe. Santa Fe is one of the, most high-profile neighborhoods of Mexico City, and you pay less than $5,000 per month at the same facility, right? And this is a newly built senior living property connected to a hospital. It has good operation. So in this example, it's 1/3 of the cost, right? And I would say that we haven't been able to find any senior living in Mexico City that is above $5,000 per month. So 5,000 is, tops. And Mexico City, same as it goes, in the US, big cities like New York, Miami, San Diego, the cost of living is higher. So you go to Merida, you go to Tijuana, Guadalajara, where cost of living is much lower. The same type of property would be, I would say, 25 to 30% less than the one I mentioned for $5,000. And the reason for this is that, the main component of the expense part of the operations of senior living are labor related, right? So in average, labor costs in Mexico are 80% lower than they are in the US. And if you look at Mexico itself, Mexico City, where labor cost is the most expensive, but you have other cities like Guadalajara, Monterrey, Merida, that wages are even lower, right? But even if we take Mexico as a point of reference, it wouldn't be crazy to say that you would be spending less than the amount that you would spend in the same facility in the US.
Right. Leave that up for a minute, Jade. I want to talk about this question. I think it's a really, really good question. Before we get to that question, I want to actually back up and set the stage here. Right now, as you're looking to move forward in development, I know you're looking. Are you looking for investor capital? Are you looking for developer expertise, or what would be most helpful to you? I think that'll just help set the stage as we talk about this question and continue the conversation.
You want to answer that one, Juanmari?
Sure.
Why not?
So since we founded the platform, we have been speaking to many investors in the US, Mexico, Latin America. We formed great alliances with them, with operators. We have soft commitments from many of these groups, right? But we're consistently looking to, further up our relationships with investment groups. So that's always welcome. The way we look at markets in Mexico, it's not the same as building in Mexico City than it is building in in Merida or Querétaro, right? So we're looking at, local level partnerships with developers. And at this point, I think ideally we want to start with acquisitions rather than newly built communities. And this is because, the biggest challenge we see for senior living in Mexico is the operations, right? So we want to, we're in a few processes of acquiring a senior living operator. So, that's what we're looking for. I think in the short term is acquisition targets, whether this is done through our proprietary deal flow channel or through brokers.
Okay. So, I mean, would that, because if there are only sort of 15 communities, the acquisition targets there aren't a lot of acquisition targets, right?
Exactly.
That's the part that I guess that would be my question. Is whether I go, man, I think I'd just go build something from scratch and I get what I want. So I don't know. Talk to me a little bit about where you guys are right now, what stage you're in your journey to really establish senior living as a major asset type, a major way for people to retire in Mexico.
Yeah, I mean, we have developed this basically we developed this platform. We have mapped all the targets for acquisitions that you have in Mexico. We have mapped all the facilities that exist in the country. We have assessed, operators. As a matter of fact, we have signed cooperation agreements with some of them, with the largest operator in Mexico right now, that most likely is going to be our operator if we're building something from scratch, or we are acquiring a facility that is already up and running. We are also looking into some opportunities in retrofitting, like existing buildings. I mean, we believe that was the smartest play, just to be able to launch, our operation in the first place and acquire something that was up and running. That is a significant operation with a scale, with an institutional scale, and that's the point where we are right now, and negotiating with two or three of these targets at the present time. At the same time, as I was saying, we have an origination platform, and we're looking into some other opportunities like retrofitting and eventually greenfield. But greenfield, constructing something from scratch, it will take us quite a few years, to be up and operating.
Okay, so I want to let's assume for a minute that the CEO of Welltower is watching this show, right? And he's listening to this conversation, and who knows, maybe he is. I know he's familiar with the work we do, but he's watching this and he goes, "Oh man, we could go build so much faster. We have no competition in Mexico to do this. There's a huge opportunity for people who can't afford assisted living. I mean, maybe only 15% of the seniors in the U.S. can actually afford what we're building now. And I'm going to allocate, I don't know, $100 million to going out and developing from the ground up some new properties. What would you develop? Where would you develop first?"
Okay. That's a great question. And before I get to answer it, I want to put a case study that is very interesting, because this has happened already in other asset classes. For example, the industrial and logistics segment in 2002, it was all informal. No banks were financing warehouses. No banks were financing logistic parks. And then you saw the entry of Prudential into the Mexican market, and you start to see the big guys coming, right? You start to see big institutional money coming into Mexico. Today, industrial real estate is the largest asset class in terms of capital, in terms of GLA in Mexico. you have Blackstone, you have Prudential, Macquarie, you have many of the players that are also active in senior living in the US. So the way we see this is that in 20 years, we're going to start, and not start, we're going to see already big players established in Mexico City for the senior living opportunity, right? And what we're trying to do over the next 5 years, we want to consolidate as much as possible, so that in 5 years, when one of these players wants to enter the market, we have the ability to attract them, so they don't have to start from scratch. Maybe we do partnerships with them. And going into your question, where would we start? I wouldn't put all my eggs in one basket. I would tell you, I want to tap the local domestic market, right? So Mexico City, to give you an example, you have 30 million inhabitants in Mexico City, and there's only 4 senior living properties, right? So I would do something in Mexico City. I would do something in Monterrey, which is the second largest metro in Mexico City. Would do something in Tijuana. Tijuana is a 25-minute Uber drive from downtown San Diego. And would do something in Merida, right? Merida, as my partner Freddie said, is the second safest city in all of the continent. We have signed a collaboration agreement with the government of Yucatan, and they're helping us. They're putting a lot of opportunities across, for us to consider, and we have a lot of support from the government there. So I would say, diversify the markets in terms of what type of demand you're looking at, domestic versus expat, and I would do those 4, 2 and 2.
Okay, I love that. So, and I really like the idea of Tijuana as being, I tend to, growing up as a kid in California, Tijuana was sort of the place where we crossed border to buy. Back then, it was fireworks and leather jackets with fringes on it, right? I mean, that's 60 years ago now. It's a long time, and I haven't been. I don't know that I've been there since I was a teenager. I've been to other parts of Mexico, but the idea of being able to tap into the U.S. market, and it is so close to San Diego as an affordable option, to me is a really brilliant idea. I was a little curious though. You didn't name any of the sort of the beach luxury places. You wouldn't go there as sort of your first place.
No. I mean, we're looking. Our main targets are Merida, as we spoke about. Cancun is another city that we're looking very close. Tijuana, of course, Querétaro, and Mexico City. Those are right now our main focus and main locations, and many others like the ones that already know, as you mentioned, Ajijic and San Miguel de Allende and Puerto Vallarta, places like that. They're places that they have very good medical infrastructure, very good safety environment, and the connectivity is also key, because if you think about it, you have half of the population of the U.S. that lives in the Sun Belt, for instance, and you're probably closer to Houston from Mexico than you are from Houston to New York, right? Yep. So connectivity-wise, it's Mexico. It's almost the 51st state of the U.S. So, but as Juanmari was mentioning, our play is to our base of sustentation. It will be the local market. You can change. Probably you will be able to change the mix of foreigners into our facilities, and that's another challenge as well, because we're going to build some facilities that will be more. You need to blend the idiosyncrasies. I mean, for instance, the ratio staff to resident. It needs to be much higher for Mexicans, for instance, because they they live differently. They want to be served more closely, and I think that's something the Americans will appreciate as well. You know what I mean? So we need to blend that. Even though Mexico is a very multicultural country in itself, because as we were mentioning, you have already 1.5 million expats living in Mexico, and latest surveys say that more than 80% of them they say they're very satisfied with their life in Mexico. So in terms of connectivity, in terms of affordability, in terms of climate, you have a lot of ingredients, and hospitality. I think hospitality is really a big one. Everybody knows about Mexican hospitality and the warmth and the family-like and the human treatment. So there's a lot of bilingual people here in Mexico, a lot of specialized personnel. So maybe the industry is struggling right now in the U.S. In terms of staffing, and we have more than plenty here in Mexico.
So when you look at these communities, do you see expats and Mexican nationals living in the same community? And do you see blending, or do you see cultural classes? What is that? How do you see that?
Yeah. So you have to look at migration, domestic migration, and also international migration. And there's also a lot of migration going on in Mexico, within Mexico, right? So
Right.
I don't know if you've ever been to Mexico City. Mexico City will invite you, and we'll have good Mexican food. And
good. I'm anxious to come.
Please. But Mexico City is, it's a city that high altitude, lots of traffic, pollution. It doesn't offer the best attributes for care of an elder, right? So what you see a lot is, some of the domestic migration going to places that have, weather is better than Mexico City, sea level, that has healthcare services, and places, for example, like Merida. I would say Merida is one of the places in Mexico that has seen the most inbound domestic migration. And you also have a large Canadian and American expat community within Merida today, right? So I think, markets like Merida would be a hybrid where you will have Mexicans and Americans blending together. Markets like Cancun would be similar to Merida because there's a lot of domestic migration into Cancun. Markets like Tijuana, I see Tijuana, more for expats. Puerto Vallarta, more for expats. So it depends on the region, right? In all of these regions, the advantage is that there's already a big hospitality and tourism industry. So a lot of the personnel that works in hotels, in hospitals, they're bilingual, right? So they're trained already to adapt to, a senior living setting for foreigners, right? So, I think depending on the market, you'll see some that are a combination and some will be more for expats.
So a couple of sort of rapid, we're running out of time, and I've got so much more I want to talk to you about. But what about sort of categories of senior living, and what about licensing? Is licensing a thing? Would it be sort of the same thing of like maybe active senior, independent living, assisted living, and memory care? And maybe even where would nursing homes fall into all of that? And then what about licensing?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think.
Go ahead, Juanmari. You're more into the licensing situation in Mexico.
So in terms of the type of facilities, we're looking at facilities that combine the three of them, right? So you have independent living, assisted living, and memory care within the same facility. They're mixed, but not in the same place. And licensing, do you mean, like regulation, or do you mean like an operator that is licensing their expertise? I didn't
Yeah,
get that.
it's a good question. So in the U.S., and I think this is now, it didn't used to be, but I think this is true now in every state. If you're doing assisted living, you have to have a license for that particular community. So the state has certain regulations. They would come when you're ready to go. They'd come out. Oftentimes, they have regulations for an administrator being licensed, that kind of thing. As opposed to say that there are some like Holiday and Hawthorne and some others that do independent living where they've got, meals and activities. They just don't do any. The differentiator in the U.S. is care. And so if there's no care, there's no license. They don't have to have license. They oftentimes will contract with an outside care agency to do that. So if I want to build assisted living, would I have to? I mean, obviously, I'd have to go through some building permits and maybe businesses licenses, but would I have to actually get a license to be an assisted living community?
You need a license from COFEPRIS. COFEPRIS is the governing body. The problem with COFEPRIS is that it's a very broad organization, and they regulate anything from medicines to vending machines to pharmacies. So it's something that is very broad. And in my opinion, the lack of having a regulator is something that is not allowing best practices in most of these facilities. So I think that, our vision is that as market starts to develop, there has to be a governing agency that regulates senior living settings so that, regardless of which senior living property you choose for your loved family, there has to be a standard, right? And I think, one of the taboos within Mexican families is that senior living will not be better than, being taken care at home. And that's proven, that is not the case. A good senior living setting will have many more advantages over care at home. But I think there needs to be a governing body that, looks at senior living itself and not in a broad manner the way it is run today through COFEPRIS.
Got it. Okay. One of the things we've sort of danced around a little bit, but I'd like to take head on, and then I want to sort of do a sort of final closing message, how people reach out to you, what the opportunity is. But I think that one of the big questions that if I were a capital provider, I would have, if I were capital, me personally, I've resolved this, but I think the question capital providers would have is, will people actually move from the U.S. or from Canada to Mexico for retirement? Do you have any data on that or thoughts on that?
Yes, we do. I mean, yeah, as we were saying, we know people that are moving for retirement. You can see that. I mean, that's what I was mentioning before. You have 1.5 million already expats living in Mexico, and you have around 200,000 that are retirees, right? Of those that are coming from North America. So that's pretty much what it is. It's not. I mean, it's not difficult for them. They usually find it much more, easygoing. The life in Mexico is more affordable. They have good connectivity. As I was saying, they have world-class medical infrastructure, and basically they can even have they have great climate as well. It's very usual. A lot of Canadians, for instance, they come during the winter, and they spend their winter in Mexico for obvious reasons, and they seem to enjoy it a lot. So I think that's not going to be an issue. And moreover, I mean, you have like in the U.S. you have 65 million Latinos in the U.S. that and 60% of those are Mexican Americans.
Yeah.
So they wouldn't have an issue. That's a
big market.
A big market in itself. And if you would take them separately, you can say that they will be probably actually they will be the fifth economy in the world, just the Latinos living in the U.S.
Yeah.
So that's a big addressable market in which you wouldn't have this you have the cultural affinity. You don't have this cultural barrier.
Yeah.
They know what Mexico looks like. They know what it is.
Yeah.
So
the other thing that really that I see as a tremendous opportunity for what you're doing is that one of the big demographic shifts we've seen in the U.S. and China and some other countries that have faced this as well is that we have many more older people who are single, who don't have spouses, who don't have children, and who don't have $15,000 a month to pay for luxury senior living. And Mexico seems like just an ideal, that seems to be like an ideal target market for that group of people as they age and they need more care. And again, I think that one thing you've said several times that I know to be absolutely true is you have world-class medical care in Mexico. I'm actually find myself wondering sometimes if it's probably more accessible there than it is here in the U.S. because it's gotten so difficult here. So as we wrap up, sort of what's your final message to investors and listeners of our show?
So I would say, Steve, before anything, thanks for inviting us to the show. It's a pleasure always speaking to you. And I would tell investors, I know your audience is US based, so a lot of things are going on in the US right now in the senior living market. Obviously, their attention is gonna be in the US, but keep an eye for Mexico. Like I said, we have seen this movie before with industrial real estate, and the early participants, the early players in Mexico, in industrial real estate in Mexico, made a very good return for their investors, right? I think senior living will provide a lot of opportunities for early investors, and if anyone wants to speak, whether these are investors, operators, service providers, we're always open to having a conversation. We have a foot in the door in Mexico, but we also have a presence in the US. We have an office in Miami. So we're always open to, conversating with anyone that is curious or has an interest to be part of this thesis.
Yeah. Terrific. Thank you very, very much for joining us. I think this is a tremendous opportunity. I expect that in 20 years, that there are going to be a lot of people who would look back on this show and say, boy, I sure wish I'd gone to Mexico 20 years ago, because it revolutionized what's happened in the senior living space. So thank you very much. I hope you have a great weekend. Thank you for watching this show. And thank you for being passionate about changing the lives of older people, our team members, and their families. Have a great weekend.
Bye.